called Environmental Conflict Resolution. Is that the actual name of ECR? The U.S. Institute for Environmental Conflict. Yeah, and I took a half-day class that was about what you're doing in a very much shorter period of time. And I was so excited by it that I went and looked all over the country. I found the guy who did the software you're going to hear about in a minute, and I hung out with him. We did work together. And after 3 or 4 years, this started to come automatically to me, okay? So, exactly, you're amazing. You're amazing. So I'm wondering whether anybody wants to challenge any of these. We've got the eclectics, the scenics, and the high flyers. I don't know if you had a chance to look, but I would like to challenge some of them. But why don't you take a look, because I think this would be useful. Look at the placement of the other teams and see if there's some that you disagree with, because, you know, if you win, you take away one of their points and get a point. That's 2 points.
Well, by all means, we want to do that.
Win, win, win. It's a fun game, and there is a prize.
Building a detailed plan to increase supply is not a rating, right? It's a goal, isn't it?
Which one is this one?
Build a desal plant to increase supply.
It's an alternative. I think they just,
Oh, it's one alternative.
it's just the way I made the graph. They could have put it there.
The goals too.
An alternative is a way of solving the problem. And so building a desal plant is a way of solving the problem. Recycled water is a way of solving the problem. Okay, so that one's good. What are any other ones that people have some questions about? Yeah, we should have made this bigger. So it's interesting, one of the things about the new cards that you made is you tended to make arguments more so than something that actually fits on the map. So Santa Cruzans need to live with less water all the time. That's an argument. And it's a goal. This is definitely a weight. Well done.
Can you read it out?
Oh, fish flows are more important than drinking water. How many of you had trouble with weights? Did you all have weights that you had to analyze? So, solving problems for Santa Cruz is more important to me than solving regional problems. So they might both be important, but you might weigh one more than the other. Now, when you make your criteria for this decision model, you're going to have to encompass everyone's criteria in the committee. But you don't have to weigh their criteria very much. And you will weigh your criteria more heavily. So that's how that fits in. Let's see, what else do we have? So keeping the cost of water down is as important as making it available. This has to move, right? Because it's about comparing two criteria and saying, I care about one more than the other.
But wasn't it already in a criteria
Isn't
policy?
this all the same?
Criteria?
Ah, there's a problem with the map.
We didn't get that split up on the chart.
Well, it's a three-dimensional chart, and you were just supposed to intuitively know that. So the weights apply to criteria, and rating scales and ratings apply to, rating scales is for the sub-criterion, and ratings are for the alternatives. So who had a rating scale? Ah, very good. This is very good. To measure the reliability of the system, need to focus on peak season effects. So rating scales are, I know I care about this and I want to evaluate it, but I'm not sure how. So there are more rating scales. Ah, here's one. The high flyers put it on sub-criterion. Yes, well, that makes perfect sense. And what it says is impacts to climate change need to be measured in terms of tons of carbon that are not properly mitigated. That's one rating scale, but another rating scale might be tons of carbon. Oh, yeah, very similar. So what are some of the take-homes? What did you seem to be engaged in this exercise, so I'm guessing something came across. Peter, was there anything?
Well, to make sense of the different arguments that come flying around to it, and where to, it's a good way to starting to categorize them.
Thanks. Anything else? So let me recapitulate with you. What would you say, now a scenario is when you have more than one goal, so that's for tomorrow. But how would you summarize the goal if you're trying to teach this to somebody else? What is the goal? The problem you're trying to solve. Well said. What are the criteria? Yeah. What matters? What are the weights and what do they apply to? No, it's how much the things that matter matter relative to one another. It's the core of the values. And as Douglas said to me, the values can show up in a lot of places, but this is the main one. Tell me this, I'm just going to say this because this was one of the ones that took me 5 years to get. But the sub-criteria break down the criteria, and they should be expressed in measurable terms. So you might put something grand and lofty here, like taking care of the environment. But then your sub-criteria would be making sure you had fish flows, or making sure you weren't doing too many carbon emissions. And you can have tensions in those, which can get very interesting. All right, alternatives? Solutions, exactly. And they're leverage points, and it's so hard to keep alternatives and goals straight. Even when I was making the game, and I've been doing this stuff a lot for the last 10 years, I'd have to double check myself. But if you think, is it something that I can manipulate, then it's an alternative. If it's something that happens willy-nilly, then it's part of your problem in figuring out about your goal, and demand is going to be really sticky for that one.
Would the word strategy apply here?
Now that's a very interesting point. Rosemary, you have an opinion about that.
Well, I think that's can we make it go? I think that strategies do sort of belong in with alternatives, in the sense that they might be a combination of several alternatives, or they might be something that says, we think this strategy is the right thing. It might not have the details of what the pieces are underneath it. So I guess I would say, as far as a solution to a problem, a strategy would be an alternative that might be not quite as formed as a specific alternative.
That was an excellent question. All right, now I'm going to hit you with another PowerPoint, but I'm going to be much more entertaining than Rosemary.
Back into the middle. Are you back over here? Okay. You know what? I'm actually gonna. We all get extra points.
Obviously something we don't really care about.
All right, so when I get a break, I'm going to look for your prize. I didn't lie. I brought it all the way from Oregon for you. All right.
Maybe it was some Oregonian one?
Or water.
Close. Nicholas, can you make sure that our foreigners are comfortable?
Oh, yeah, well, how do we?
Good ones, but
Yeah, just send them a chat and make sure.
Does it go to everybody?
It does.
Oh, you know what? This is Dvorak.
It's what?
Dvorak.
Oh,
Only you can type. I can do hand signals, but
and this one isn't, so we'll both be confused. They're just going to have to be okay. Oh, except I'm supposed to be using the good microphone, and you have it, and you gave it here. Okay, welcome to Chaos Central. I think we're doing pretty well. And I feel like I've walked a mile today with this thing. All right, so I'm just going to quickly run you through some context for why I'm talking about multi-criteria decision support, which is a tool that you may or may not want to use, and I'll be asking you your opinion at the end of this. Yes? No, because these are so silly, you don't want them. So, remember I talked about looking for this guy, Philip Murphy, who did the software you're about to look at, and forged a friendship which has involved a certain amount of mutual irritation. And one of the ways that I irritate him is by referring to multi-criteria decision support instead of multi-criteria decision analysis. Now, if you want to look it up, there's 3 different peer-reviewed academic journals that go on and on about all the details of the analysis. But I like the word support because this is not a black box that's going to make the decision for you. You get that, right? It's a support for you in your thinking. So there we are. We have the little support thing with the analysis in small. This was exactly for you, Sid. How do you come up with a visual for complementarity? Well, these are complementary colors. So multi-criteria is complementary with the recon real deal approach that you've chosen, and it's complementary with scenarios, which we're going to talk about tomorrow, but they're also separate. You don't have to, just because you picked recon doesn't mean you have to pick multi-criteria. And certainly just because I love multi-criteria doesn't mean you have to pick multi-criteria, right? We're here. I don't think you're here to satisfy my intellectual curiosity. So the other piece in the context is, and Philip agrees with me about this, multi-criteria, I don't see you using it in the last meeting. I don't see you pushing a button and going, oh, this must be the right alternative. I see you, if you want to, using it quite constructively during recon, and maybe you want to take it into the real deal until you get, it helps you get steeped in the information. And once you're steeped in the information, I think you'll naturally just say, I don't need it anymore. But, you know, it's your process, you'll choose that time. Multi-criteria is robust because, this is for Sue Holt, it's a translucent box. So what's underneath is a kind of mathematics that's been known for more than 100 years, but it's very simple. You could actually do it by hand. And if you want to look inside the software and find out exactly how those numbers popped up, you can trace every little piece of it. So there's no, what's a kind of software where you don't get to see what's inside? Proprietary. It's not that kind. Again, this is something that's kind of geeky and linear, but what it does is it saturates you with the information, and as much research has shown, one of the elements of creativity is to become absorbed in the matter. So that's how I see the usefulness of it. To be robust for you, if you decide you want to use this, you need access to it. You need to take it home and play with it. Right now, you would either have to buy the software and have a PC. So if you want to use it, you're going to have a conversation with Rosemary and Tina about how to get access to it and be able to play with it at home so you can generate those insights and just bang on the machine. And of course, if you did invest in having a web version, then potentially you could involve the public in a similar way. So when I'm thinking about investments that you would make, I always want to think about more than one benefit you might make from it. So what are the products of multi-criteria? Aha, this thing, which I'll fly by this time and one other time today, and I'll talk about in detail in July when you actually maybe have some alternatives to talk about. But it's just a graph of sensitivity analysis. It's one of the products of multi-criteria. Once you put everything into your model, everything on that map, right? Then you can figure out which issues actually might drive a different answer. And those are the ones that you want to focus on. So it helps you prioritize your research, among other things. The other great thing, and this is not true of all multi-criteria decision software, but many of them, is it lets you handle uncertainty. And I'm going to show you that as I walk through the software. I like the map. I like that map. I like to use that with the public, whether you want to go for the multi-criteria decision or not. But it's very useful, as Rick said, to be able to go, okay, wait a minute, which part of the decision model does this fit in? And you know, in another decision, the same thing could fit in a totally different part of the map, but it's for this decision. So the map's good. And what you'll see is essentially you have a three-dimensional map, Mark, where you would see criterion and you could click on it and you could go to notes underneath that would tell you about the weights. Because fundamentally you can see, I did a terrible job there of trying to draw out that thing that's behind the criteria or behind the alternatives. But if you had it online, you could just click on it or peck on it and see some of the details. Okay, so that's it. That's just the background. Now I'm going to get you into the software. Do you have any questions? All right, I do. How do I get to where I want to be? You know I'm a Mac person, and I actually got this thing for you. I'm going to continue to hang on to it. Thank you. My problem is that now I don't have as big of a screen because of the projector. Great. Okay, so I'm going to show you all this. There's one drawback to these kinds of show and tells, though, because multi-criteria works best when you care and know the topic. So I'm going to show you a topic that you don't care about and know about. But I want you to imagine that if you were intimately connected with and cared about the outcome, and you also intuitively knew a lot about the problem, how this approach creates kind of a dissonance between what you know and what you're trying to make articulate. And that teaches you stuff. You'll see what I mean. Okay, so on the left, that's this map, right? This group of people wanted to prioritize what projects. It was a startup company. What projects were they going to prioritize? And they have the alternatives off to the right, which include consulting, a popular product, a major product, which actually is this software. This was a decision that they tried to make before they had the software, and then once they built the software, then they looked at what they could have done better. You've got the main criteria are desirability, profitability, feasibility, and the one you can't see is avoiding risk. The sub-criteria, see how revenue is more measurable than profitability, for instance? So you're trying to take sub-criteria and make them not just quantifiable, but also perhaps qualitatively, depending on what kind of sub-criterion it is, but measurable. And now, if you look under prioritize the project, you can see that one of the things they did was weigh how much desirability, profitability, feasibility, or risk mattered to them. And I don't know, I think you can judge the relative age of these people because they said avoiding risk was unimportant to them. And profitability was critical, and they were right, very right, about desirability being important. So let's look at how they thought about desirability. And slow me down if you need to. Okay, so looking at desirability, they were looking at what they called manageability. Was it in line with their corporate goals? And was the staff interested in it? So again, you've got staff interest being very high. But what does manageability really mean? Let's go and see how they rated these alternatives for manageability. But I have to remember which window to go in. So here's a really important thing to do if you have a scale that's qualitative, is to use really rich, interesting words that communicate something to other people, but also help you have a conversation about what you really meant. And so what they seem to mean is how they're going to get along. If you look at the scale, it goes from perfect team to a war zone. So another group might have thought about manageability in a really different way. You know, how easy was it to scope? So they went through and they thought that popular product 2 would create a war zone, and their major conflict looks like there would be some conflicts consulting one came out as the highest of the possibilities. So that would be the rating scale that they chose for manageability, and these were the ways that they rated them. If you want to look at all the different ratings, you can see here's the sub-criteria, here's the units they measured them in, like tons or whatever, the low point, war zone, and the high point, and then here are the values. So for consulting one, you know, it did pretty well. The other thing, though, that's so important, you see how we're trying to reduce some of the chaos and keep our points of agreements clear and make our notes clearer and not have version control problems. It's hard even so far, and it'll just get harder. So what this thing does is it creates a really easy place to put notes. So, which don't show up very well. That's my fault, not Philip's. There's something that I didn't want to put on my computer, but you can fill this field, and if you were talking about, for instance, the notes on an alternative, and you talk about that alternative at every meeting, you would have the summaries of those conversations right there where people could very quickly access them. So that's not very sexy, but it's much more important than you can believe. All right, so now you're going to do what I say not to do. You're going to say, what's the score? And the score has major product winning. All right? It doesn't win by very much. But one of the things that could happen here is you could look at these results, and if you were intimately associated with this problem, you could look at the comparisons and you could say, but that doesn't make any sense. What was it? You used a term. It doesn't pass the sniff test. So you could look at popular product one and say, but I thought that would do much better. What's going on? And you could go, if you weren't colorblind, and you could unpack it a little bit. So for instance, if you were curious why Consulting 2, way over there on the right, did so badly, you can quickly gauge that one of the problems is it scored so badly for profitability. So if you, without doing a sensitivity analysis, which would be the uber wonderful way to go about it, at a meatball level, you could say, maybe I should study that profitability piece because it's so important to how Consulting 2 did, and I'm just not sure. It just doesn't smell right. So this is all the pieces that are in Rosemary's, if those were in a decision model, and you're like, I'm not sure about them, those tension points would probably show up when you tried to unpack this. So let's go back, though, to the scores. And so real story, some folks in Florida who were managing Lake Okeechobee, bought this software off the website and used it to make some management decisions about the lake. And it didn't go well. You have seen the headlines about this. And to the extent where the people who made those decisions were asked to come report at Senate hearings about just exactly how badly things did go. And before they went to report, they asked Philip to come and coach them a bit. And he met with them, and basically they said, how did you screw us up so badly? And he said, well, what was the uncertainty? What about the uncertainty? Well, he had people in the room who were capable of on the fly, and this is a recon type thing that works very well. On the fly, provide some uncertainty measures for the biggest issue, weather. So let's pretend that this is Okie, whatever it is, and look what happens. When you put the uncertainty in, major product does not necessarily look like the best product anymore. So if you as a committee are able to handle the uncertainty in the model and to communicate that to the public, you will be doing an extraordinary thing that many people don't manage. How burned out are you all? Is that enough multi-criteria, or can I just jam in one more piece of information? Yeah, that's for July. No way, I'm not doing that to them. Uncertainty in the ratings is what I want to do. And here we go. When you're putting in the information, you can, at the time that you put it in, you can assign what type of uncertainty and what amount of uncertainty there is, okay? So you put in a single number for revenue, but you not only gave the brackets, but you also just described it as being a bell curve. But you could have described it as being this way, or log normal, whatever that means. And depending on the alternative, you might have very different uncertainty curves. That's hugely important, and to be able to document it and discuss it as you're putting in the information about the ratings creates an integrity that is super important. Yeah, questions?
I'm just trying to understand. The Okeechobee example you gave, the people had not given enough weight to the uncertainty factor. Is that the problem that they had?
They didn't put it in at all.
Oh, I see. I did understand.
Oh, here's a good thing about weights. Sid helped me to prepare this talk, and Sid and Sue did, and he kind of helped me understand that this would be a good thing to do, and now I'm remembering it. Let's imagine that somebody went in and somebody older and said, you know what, you're crazy. Risk is critically important to me. Let's see if that alone is enough. Now let's look at the score. Yeah, even without considering that uncertainty, major product drops significantly. So what you'll find out is that if you could agree on a decision model and you agreed on the alternatives and how to describe them and you agreed on all the ratings and you agreed on the goal, you still have different weights. So you could have a completely respect-worthy discussion and yet have a different preferred alternative. That's to be expected, and I'm not aiming to have you agree on your weights during recon, if ever. But to be able to talk about them and show the differences that it make would be fantastic. Other questions?
Yeah, I'm a little confused about the relationship between risk and uncertainty. Because if I'm willing to take a high risk, the uncertainties become less relevant, correct? So they are somehow connected, they're not independent.
Yes, and of course I would love for you to talk about that with Philip, but I think what would happen then is when you saw those gray bars, you would say, I don't care, at that very end on that score piece.
I'm imagining we could use this tool in more than just a quantitative way, you know, like just to give an example, suppose we find that water rights to San Vicente Creek are really confusing, and it would probably take a couple of years for water rights attorneys to sort it out, and, you know, but wow, if we were able to get water rights to San Vicente Creek, you know, we could all go home. So it would be really cool if we did it. So it wouldn't score very high on this because there would be a lot of uncertainty, you know, but we could tell the city council, look, this is one of the things that would be worth spending some money to do more research on.
Absolutely, and I'll tell you more about that with the sensitivity analysis in July, but I think you've hit on another thing, which is this is a great way to actually tell stories. As linear and geeky as it is, the stories are the what if. And you could just say, well, what if? Let's just imagine that would work, and then see how it affects your various criteria. Am I on the same track?
Yeah.
Okay. So, would you like to continue to use this until you don't want to continue to use it?
this is one person's view, and I'm flexible about it, and I could be persuaded otherwise, but I can't answer that question until I try it, honestly. I don't know whether this is a detour away from seat of the pants stuff that I've been doing for decades, or whether this actually will be helpful. So I think I understand it, but whether it's going to be helpful, I couldn't even give you a guess right now.
I like that. Any other thoughts?
You have to investigate alternative approaches.
Other than using multi-criteria? Okay. Well, yeah.
Your question was, do we want to use this as opposed to?
Right. Well, you could do both, you know, talk about complementary. I guess I had thought that the alternative would be a regular planning process, and so I want to toss that question over to Rosemary. If we didn't use multi-criteria, what would we do? Is that fair at this hour of the night?
So I think the sort of traditional process is some kind of definition of what alternatives are and rating them. The question, I guess, is it's basically some kind of, you know, okay, so let's start. The 7-step problem-solving process is define the problem, you know, criteria for a good solution, identify alternatives, rate the alternatives against the criteria, select, implement, you know, evaluate, start over again, that kind of thing. So it's basically this. It's the question of, do you want to use this particular software mechanism to support that, or do you want to do something that's less sort of mechanistic? Yeah, I think that's the alternative.
And also, there's absolutely no need to use this particular software. There's a ton of it around. So this isn't a shelf for that. But what I think I'm seeing is it would be okay to explore this further, like play with it next month. Yeah.
So in the conversations that the staff and the consulting team have had kind of about this idea, I think that one of the things that appeals to me about it, for whatever it's worth, just me expressing, you know, what I've learned, is that there's going to be a limit, just a practical reality limit to how much we can have researched in terms of all the possible research questions. And I think that the sensitivity analysis mechanism of this, which if you populate this kind of a thing, you can help see what things really make a difference. If you change this a little bit, it makes a big difference in the outcome, versus things that have a relatively smaller impact. I don't know what that looks like at the moment in terms of what those criteria might look like, but I think from the practical point of view of helping us to hone in on those things we really need to understand more about because they're really important to the decision, that's one of the reasons I really like this idea.
I'm kind of confused about how the process of using the software works. It sounds like you're creating a relational database that is designed to evaluate each of the alternatives in conjunction with one another at the same time. And how do we deal with inputs in the system? Is this something that we all are inputting in whatever we think or feel is appropriate, or is there a gatekeeper? How do we deal with where the data comes from to do all the the qualitative rankings that are discretionary?
Well, qualitative rankings are not necessarily more discretionary than quantitative, but that's a side issue. Okay. My pedantic side just reared up. I think both. So what I would love is that there be a certified version of the decision model that only contains the things that you've agreed on as a committee, and that grows. But that you can take it home and do it on a web version and say, what if? We agreed to 7, but I want to see how the model looks if I put in 12, like I just did by changing the risk. So people could play with it on their own and just do a lot of what ifs, but there would be one version of the model that you would slowly be building based on agreement.
I guess I would just say that clearly it'll help to have some sort of tool to help us decide. You're clearly familiar with this tool, and that's a plus. And, you know, we've got to get moving on this stuff, so I'm ready to support it and move on.
There was something that Eric said that maybe misunderstanding. I mean, you said this would help us to decide. And just to be clear, you don't have to take this all the way to the decision point. You can leave it behind you. I'm sorry.
You're almost done.
You can leave it behind you as you go. You know, you can decide, okay, we're done with NCPS. It doesn't have, you don't have to stay with it.
Okay, excellent, true. So, and it could be useful. Anybody else want to make a comment? Sarah?
I kind of see this as kind of using it as a documentation of our decision making along the way too, I guess would be kind of one of the most useful parts of it for me, rather than necessarily the end product, more of how we're discussing and what we're putting into the decisions as we move along.
Yeah, it's so much less dramatic and enticing than some of the other possibilities, but a day in and day out, getting the work done, that documentation thing.
But then that leads to a practical question. Are you guys going to be doing this kind of in the background, or are we going to each step going to have to put in, oh, is that a criteria that we're going to rank as very likely or very, I mean, like, I guess how does that kind of, we'll have to discuss that.
Well, it's your process, so there's different ways you can go. The way I would envision it is that, at least for recon, you would always be putting in your own weights, so there wouldn't be committee-wide weights. With your own weights, that's how you do that exploration piece. And I think agreeing in 4 months on some of those huge values issues is unrealistic. But the characterization and description of the alternatives and the estimates of the ratings. Now, if you're going to agree on them for recon, they're going to have huge brackets. But that's what recon is supposed to be. Regardless of whether you want to do this or not, you're going to have to agree on ratings. And the way to do that will probably be a big fat pencil. The thing is, we need direction. You don't have to decide yay or nay today, but you need at least to give direction in terms of next month. And at some point, if you want to use this, then you're going to need to make it available in some less clunky way than what I have now.
There's a student version everyone can download if you want to play with it before you make a decision too.
Also, one of the reasons I bought this thing is with the idea that if you wanted to borrow it and play with the major version, you're welcome to it. Okay, so,
Nice question.
yeah.
This only works on a PC?
This particular one.
So is it possible to have a PC at the water department that we could come in and play with? I'm not going to buy a PC, and I don't think you can afford to give us each one to play with for the next 6 months. So that might be one way to. And so then if I can come and play with it for an hour, I'll give you a better answer than I can give you now.
Absolutely, I love the thing that you want to drive it. So I'm always saying this is your process, and you know that I mean it, but there's a couple places I'm going to get stuck. If you want to use this, you need to have it available to everybody on their computers. So you can all use it, you can do it at home, you can play with it all you want, and we can do it together. But in the interim, take that thing. I hate it. I'm a Mac person. And then, all right, but just the thing is that you're in control, which means that unless you tell us what's next, there won't be a what's next. So where are we? Would you like to play with this a little bit? You want to do it by yourself at home? Yes, and you can.
Another option, instead of having multi-issue, what the term, this multidisciplinary, but pick something we need to talk about fairly early on, even at the reconnaissance level. I make a random example, but what is the likely demand if we don't introduce an alternative? We've got a line there. A lot of us have some thoughts about what would bear on that question. Lots of stuff bears on it. Take that one question not all of them, and have us work together on using this software together, go around the room. In other words, try it for real on one issue, one question, for which we don't have agreement necessarily at all. And that would be one way to go at this, I think. It's just a thought. And then at the end of that, we'd see whether it was helpful.
To make a decision. I was just wondering if you could check, I heard that little swipey sound, so maybe Doug has an opinion. Okay, so, yes.
Yeah, I'd love to get the free student version, take it home and play with it.
Okay, so here's what I would propose. You can get the free student version, or we can find ways for you to use the big version. Yeah? Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm just looking for one that is Mac compatible. Like maybe we can just find one and we already have a month.
Yeah, and actually Clark has done some research about that, and there's some stuff online. A lot of this stuff doesn't do the uncertainty so well. So we want to be thoughtful about that. But, yes, there was something of that?
Yeah, he said it's difficult to hear the discussion, so this may be redundant. But would it help the decision process here to discuss the alternatives to MCDS for us? Presumably, a homegrown Excel spreadsheet would be one.
Yeah, definitely, you could. Absolutely. I don't think it does the sensitivity analysis, but, so, yes.
I'm just wondering if we're going to try and test drive this thing in time to give you feedback for next meeting, if it wouldn't be worthwhile for you to develop a common question that we would all play with so that we could see how it fits together a little bit.
That's intriguing. Okay, and Peter has an idea.
I understand this is a tool, and so there are two things we have to decide. We have to decide the content of our future meetings and what tools we're going to use. Is that correct? I mean, I'm seeing that right? Because the content is the more important thing. I mean, how we go about it, there are many, I mean, we can do this like in a spreadsheet, or we can just talk until we come to agreement. But right, so I think the content is much more important at this point, isn't it? What do you want to talk about?
Well, we definitely, okay, that's a really good point. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to take...
Repeat the last point.
All right, so Peter was saying, hey, it's much more important to focus on the content of what we're going to do at the next meeting than a tool. And yes. So we have a discussion at the end of the meeting tomorrow about what you want to do in your July and August agendas. And to facilitate that discussion, we made draft agendas that you could look at, and you have that in your materials. So let's take some of these ideas that were generated now, including having a student version of a decision, and percolate on those. And then tomorrow, when we look at the July and August thing and the Gantt chart, we can see whether deciding on the tool is in the critical path or not. So that's where we are for today. And then, Nicholas, I think we're ready for the independent review panel piece.
Yeah, oh yeah, we have to go. In fact, we're a little late for it, so we're going to have to decide. But we're ready to move on. So it's 10 to 9, and we expect you to be here about 15 minutes ago. So we're about 15 minutes behind, and 9:30 was when we were going to stop.
Thank you. 9:30 was when we were going to stop, and you were pretty clear with us when we talked about planning these meetings that you don't want to run over on Friday night. And we've got a pretty full day tomorrow. We've actually already moved things around, so we sort of pushed 10 minutes more into tomorrow than this evening. So one way of handling this would be to say, yeah, well, it's going to be 9:45 before we get out of here. Is that a reasonable thing to do? What do you think? Anybody have objections for that? Do you have a bicycle lamp? What? Yeah. We estimated 35. Yeah, we estimated 40 minutes. It may be quick. We can never tell how long these things are going to take. So,
I think independent's going to...
Really? Then we know that we're ready to go until 9:45 if we have to, but probably the motivation will just drum us through this?
We don't know that.
We don't know that.
No,
That,
we know that we want to go forward and we'll discuss it if and when we need it.
I don't actually understand what you're saying.
We haven't decided to go till 9:45. We're going to go forward on the IRP.
Oh.
As we get closer to 9:30, we'll decide if we want to extend. We'll see if
Okay.
we really need to.
Okay,
If
okay.
this goes quickly, we don't have to deal with that.
I understand. I would like to do it the other way around, but I'll go your way if you like. The other way around is to say we've got enough time to take the amount of time on the agenda, which is the agenda that you all agreed to and all the rest of it. And if it turns out that you're done earlier than that, that's great.
We're burning time.
Either way, we're getting on with it. So let's go. So what we want to come out with here is a agreement on the, as it says here, on the role and structure of the IRP and of the process for selecting its members so that the city can start the selection process. That's where we want to end up. And you have got a couple of documents that were sent out to you. We have had one thing that's important to know about this is that oh no, that was the other document. No, we're okay on this one. So you've got the documents. Let's just sort of start from the top and tell us about any sticking points that you have. Let's start with the paper that Rosemary did, then we'll do the RFQ later, which is kind of follows it. So let's do the paper. What issues do you have as you read that through? What do you want to talk about? Oh, I'm sorry, I thought it was something else. This is a substantial decision. Do you want to have public comment before you start? Shall I ask the public if they want to comment? Yeah. Do you have any? Does anybody in the public have any comments about this item? Okay, I'm sorry. I just realized that you said you wanted to do that. So here we go, Mike.
So you asked a question in the mic, I think.
You need the mic.
Sorry, but it's like you got to deal with this.
Yep. Here you go.
You asked if people had issues, and I don't want to cut anybody off, but you didn't get a response very quickly. And I think the reason for that is because I think my view is I read it carefully, looked it over. I could battle over a couple words here or there or something, but I don't think it would be productive. I think this is good, and I think we'll not know any more until we see who applies for this thing. And I think we're asking the right questions of them. This should draw the right people. It explains the concept we had pretty clearly. So that's where I'm at about it, and why you're not going to get any more detail from me. Maybe I'm not trying to cut anybody off that has an issue or wants to change something, but I'm quite capable of spending a half an hour going into the wording, but it's irrelevant from my point of view, I think.
Thank you. I'm sure that you're not cutting anybody off. If anybody wants to say anything, I bet they will. Does anybody have anything else they want to say? I mean, clearly, I'm making the assumption that you might want to work on particular items that you didn't agree with, but it may be that you just want to say yes. Does anyone want to say, Rick?
Well, I was on the subcommittee that kind of approved this, and so I approve of it. I did share it with someone who gave some feedback, and I share that for the committee. So this person thought that the line that said 15 years or more of experience preferred should be struck. First, it doesn't allow for a diversity of experience and knowledge. Knowledge in sustainable water issues is rapidly evolving, and asking for 15 years experience excludes anyone graduating before 1999. A lot of new information and scholarship have emerged since '99, and this caveat could be used to exclude people who might bring cutting-edge research, practice, and norms to the critical review. Younger experts are often more up to date of the latest research. Second, I suspect sustainability was in few experts' formal education trainings prior to 1999. Third, more senior experts tend to not have the same time available, whereas more recently developed experts are more apt to put in the necessary time for a thorough, critical review.
Thank you. Before we go to Mike, Carrie, help me here. I think that there was a section that was not agreed to by the subcommittee that was putting it together. Is that right? One sentence. Yeah, so the highlighted yellow sentence, we do need to pay attention to that, I think, and make sure that if we have disagreement about it, we surface the disagreement. But let me hand the mic to Mike.
I don't think ours is highlighted. Mine isn't anyway. Okay, so, yeah, it is, you're right, it was. I understand how that 15-year thing came up. I think David's the one that raised an issue that led to it. I understand how the 15-year experience, I'm willing to move to the idea of something that says like significant practical experience in this field. What I don't want is somebody who's just out of grad school with a wonderful idea that they've never tested in the real world. I don't know that it has to be 15 years. So I wonder about something that just says, significant real experience in this field or something. Because I don't think we want brilliant graduate students who have never had to solve a problem.
So, Rick, how do you feel about that? Does anybody object to the change that Mike and Rick have just figured out?
That they have significant practical experience in these fields, as opposed to, which would rule out somebody who, graduated summa cum laude from somewhere but never actually had to solve a problem for a real agency or client or something,
Thank you. Any sort of doubts about that? Angustia, as they say? Mark?
While I'm pretty supportive of young graduates and their bright ideas, my personal take on this is that we really want someone with significant experience. There's just some things that you can't get without putting in the time. And for me, if I'm going to look to somebody to advise me about the quality of work of another technical person, I really want somebody who's been around and has some experience. So I'm happy to strike the provision, but I don't think we should seriously consider a candidate that's a young graduate engineer, in spite of how smart they might be and how great their graduate work might have been. This is a very serious problem that we're contemplating here, and the role that we want this person to play is to review the work of another expert. And in that regard, we need somebody with considerable expertise, and that, I think, comes with time. So that's my feeling.
Thank you, Mark. But what I'm understanding is that you're okay with it being changed from 15 years to sort of substantial experience or something, but you want it to be clear that what you mean by substantial experience is kind of capital S substantial and capital E experience. Thank you. David.
I thought what we were trying to put together was a peer review panel. So if you're looking at a peer review panel, you got to look at who are the peers of the people that we're going to be reviewing. The people we're going to be reviewing aren't brand new out of the box, and they aren't even people who have only 5 years of experience. They're people who are leaders in their fields who have been doing this usually for 20 years or more. And so the notion that if we're going to have a peer review panel, it's got to be peers to who we are reviewing. And that is people with very substantial experience. I don't know that I need to put a number on it, but in terms of the qualifications that we're looking for, it's people who would qualify as peers to those who are going to be working with us as our consultants.
Thank you, David. It sounds like you can still go without a number, but again, you're underlining the fact that the people on the panel have got to be kind of commensurate with the people that they're.
I don't know where in the proposal we would put the wordings, but when you say significant practical experience in these fields, I would be wanting to be saying that it would be significant practical experience that makes them appear in these fields to those whom they will be reviewing.
Peter, before we go to Peter, how does what David has just said sound? This kind of, it's essentially further qualifications. Get rid of the number, but you're qualifying it now. So not only is it sort of substantial with a capital S, but it's actually the people that are selected for this have to have the same kind of, they have to be the peers of the people that they're considering.
And if I could just add to that, you see, the place where I see peer review the most is in hospitals. The hospitals have peer review for treatment of patients and outcomes, and while peer review panels can include someone who is younger, predominantly they would be people who are more mature. And so part of this is that we're talking about a panel and not just one individual to do the peer review work. So there is room for some diversity of experience, but in any case, they all have to be have experience operating at a level that would make them like a peer.
Thank you for that clarification. Peter, and then we'll go on.
I want to clarify, we're talking not about a peer review panel, but an independent review panel. And I agree with you. I'm looking for a variety of experiences, and it's not necessarily the length only that counts, but also, you know, the depth in another field. And I could imagine that a younger engineer, and I'm not talking about just coming out of graduate school, but has 5-10 years in the field, they have other focuses than somebody who has done it for 30-40 years, and is kind of, you know, that. So I'm looking for variety more than when it's a certain length of experience in the general field. That's what I would be. And since we have 3 to 5 members on there, I'm confident that we find enough variety by nature of that definition here, so to satisfy our goal.
Thank you, Peter.
Well, you know, when I read this, and I was on the subcommittee as well, I mean, we're not excluding someone that doesn't have 15 years experience. We're just saying they're preferred. If we get an application from somebody and he's only been in the business for 5 years and he's solved the water problem in some third world country where they have no water, I'm pretty sure we'd want him on our peer review panel. We're not excluding him, so I don't see what the issue is with leaving it there.
And my comment runs in the same direction. Pragmatically, we'll make this selection among people that apply. We don't want to waste people's time by telling them we're looking for, you know, brilliant people. We're looking for people with, as we said, significant practical experience. Among those people that apply, we're not offering that much money for the job. Among the people that apply for it and stuff, we'll choose, and we'll, you know, some people will rate the years more than others, but I don't think we don't have to come to an agreement now on how significant or something, rather than let's attract a body of applicants and see among them who seems to meet our need for having this level of professional experience.
So what I'm hearing is really, can we just stick with the original text, we got to, thank you. Butt in.
Okay, so I want to take you to the RFQ that is behind this, page 4 of that, where there's submittal of SOQs and there's evaluation criteria. So when we wrote this, basically we said how well they fit the panel characteristics. There would be some scale associated with that. But I think given the nature of the conversation here, it might make sense to add a separate bullet for sort of the level and the applicability of their experience and just leave it at that, because it allows us to, you know, whether we leave the 15 years preferred in or take it out, it allows us to say, well, we have these 10 people and who do we think actually is really, you know, good relative to that criteria, and we get to rate those. So that's my suggestion for, and whether we change the language or not, it's kind of up to you, but I think that given the nature of this conversation, we should add that as a separate criteria in the evaluation for the SOQs.
Thank you. And I don't, by the way, think that you're butting in at all. I think the people who really know the document best should be speaking up. So don't just kind of wait for Mike to finish. Oh, right. So I'll just, here are some comments from Doug. So I'm going to channel Doug for a bit. In the peer panel draft, that's the document we were just talking about, interacting with its consultant support team, in quotes, which is apparently a quote from it, should this also include assistance with our interactions with staff? Does that resonate with anybody? Anyone who knows the document, if it doesn't kind of grab anyone, I think we just have to move on. I mean, it's one of those things about not being here.
No,
yes?
The answer was yes. When we spoke about this, we talked about this review panel to help us understand and rate and evaluate all of the technical information we get from our consultants, from our staff, from the public, from anybody, So if that's Doug's question, I think, yes, this panel will help us evaluate any information that we get. That's their role, right?
Does it need to be specified in the document? Is there anything the document can...
That would be in this highlighted section right here, right?
The highlighted section is about whether it's the goal or...
Yeah, what is the goal to provide?
Where does it say interacting with its consultant support team?
Yeah, provide critical review on assigned as needed basis, product creative WSAC, technical support team. The goal of the panel's work is to offer feedback to the committee on the work provided by its technical support team. I mean, so you could...
So what he would say is, can you put in and staff?
Technical support team includes staff is what he's saying.
Yeah, I think technical support team includes staff, but it's and staff.
Would you like to add staff? Yeah. Okay, so we'll add staff.
Except when you add it, don't say and staff. Technical support team,
Including staff.
Including staff, thank you. He's good at words, this guy.
And I'm comfortable with Mike's language, by the way, especially if we add in that other criteria that Rosemary suggested in the RFQ.
Yeah, I thought that was good.
So it's true, I kind of jumped ahead to Doug without dealing with the, I'm getting tired, without dealing with the issue that was on the table. So before we go and look at the rest of Doug's stuff, let us finish up this question, which was this business of the 15,000 or 15 years rather, and how to handle it. So the proposal is to add that bullet that Rosemary quoted in the RFQ, and
change the 15 years to significant professional experience.
Any objections?
I think you said significant practical experience.
That's what I meant. Yes.
Significant practical experience. Yeah.
So this is what I wrote listening to that conversation. Panel members would have scientific or technical training and significant hands-on experience as a practitioner and substantial practical experience, maybe one of the others, in scientific or technical disciplines relevant to the work of the Water Supply Advisory Committee. So do you need both of those and substantial practical experience or significant hands-on experience? That's enough?
One or the other.
Okay.
Drop the hands-on and make it significant.
Okay. Make it substantial practical experience and drop the hands-on part? Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. So let me go back to Doug, since that one is settled, I think. Another one from Doug. I would expect the IRP to also help us vet staff-provided information and analyses. So again, he's saying, if it's coming from the staff, we want the IRP to vet that as well.
So David's suggestion was including staff, and I think, does anybody object to that?
And, yeah, so it gets taken care of in the same way. Okay. Can we look at the highlighted section where there was a bit of friction? I think, honestly, if the subcommittee had more time to do this, they would have resolved this before it came to you, but it's just the way that it worked out. So does everybody know what the highlighted section is? Okay, let us read it. Could you read it? I don't have the copy.
The goal of the panel's work is to offer feedback to the committee on the work provided by its technical support team, including staff. That's what it says based on your just momentarily ago amendment.
So would anyone like to explain where the differences lay?
I thought we had agreement on that.
So that's okay.
As I recall, there was a number of email exchanges around the language, and we came to a consensus with the sentence as it's presented here. That's what I remember. I'm not sure why it's highlighted.
So does anybody have anything that contradicts that? Rick?
I think there was some discussion as to whether commenting on our work plan would be within the purview of this independent review panel. So, and some people thought, well, no, we don't want to overload them by asking them to comment on our work plan.
So this doesn't say that now, right?
So it doesn't say it now, that's right. So
I don't see the fact that it doesn't say that, you know, inhibiting. I mean, we can ask these people anything we want, right? I mean, right, yeah, so.
Are we done with that? Okay. So are there any other issues that come up as you read this? Okay, then we have agreement on this with the amendments that were developed. Again, I suppose we need to go around. Just say your name or something like that.
Mark.
Erica.
Yeah, we're assuming that you say that if you give your name, you're agreeing.
David,
Charlie?
Rick, Mike.
Sid? Peter?
Sarah.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Then we are going to wrap up.
I have a question.
Yes, David.
So what's our process for the IRP from here? Is it got to go back for approval to the council, or did they already approve it? And is this something that'll then be, you'll put out the RFQ? And how have we decided how the interviewing is going to happen and whether anybody from the committee is going to participate in that?
So I think that it doesn't have to go back to council since it was included in the package of stuff that they got the other day. And presumably if we get people to accept the honorarium as described in this document, it doesn't require a specific appropriation. We tune this up and get some dates in it, and where there are blanks as it exists right now, we could put it out. People who want to give us people they want us to send it to should do that between now and, you know, the middle of a couple weeks out, let's say. And then if you guys want to set a subcommittee who wants to work with me on, I would suggest before we interview, we at least, let's see what we get. We'll put it out for 3 weeks or so, and then we can evaluate whether or not we really need to even interview. Maybe it will be so clear. If we have 100 people who apply, which would be like a miracle, then we would probably want to further sieve in some fashion in a written thing, and then we would interview perhaps. But I think that if the committee wants to set a subcommittee to participate in that, that's fine with me.
Thank you. So do you want a subcommittee? Do we want to go there? Yeah. You would like a subcommittee? There is sort of certain things we need to nail down about subcommittees. We have it on the wall. First of all, before we decide who's going to be in it, we want to, it's going to be called the IRP Selection Subcommittee. Panel? Subcommittee. What is it going to do? What do you want it to do?
It's an ad hoc committee. It's not a Brown Act committee because it's short term.
Yeah, exactly. What do you want it to do? What's it charge?
Work with the staff to create the process for this hiring.
Actually, I think the process is pretty set. It's just going to review the applicants that come in, and make recommendations to the committee.
Review qualifications.
Review the qualifications of the applicants that come in and make recommendations to the committee. The duration is short term, so we're not going to run into the Brown Act because of that. The scope of responsibility we've described. Members and external communication are the only other two things you need to figure out. Who wants to be on this? David, Sarah, David Baskin, Sarah, Rick. What? Three's? Okay, we got it. Those three. Yeah.
I'm checking with Doug. I'm guessing he would say no, but who do we have?
We have Sarah,
David,
Rick, and David Baskin.
Sue Holt may have thought that that's what she was signing up for.
Oh, because she was on the on.
The original committee.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've got two people that may certainly Sue may want to, and perhaps even Doug may want to. Does anybody object to them being? Okay, so Doug's we just wait to hear from Sue. Nobody objects to having Sue join it if she wants to. That's great. External communications, do you have any concerns about who this subcommittee talks with? No, okay. then you've got your new subcommittee, and I think that's all we need to do on this topic, isn't it, Erica?
I just am requesting that maybe once it's all written and ready to go, that we get an email. That way, if we think there may be somebody or groups that we can forward it on to, that way you get more applicants. Thanks.
Thank you, Erica. Then we'd like you to fill in your evaluations for today, for this meeting. We'd also, there's one thing we have to remember is that we're pushing one item forward from today. We swapped it around, really. We're going to discuss the presenters and sub-consultants issue. That'll be the top of the agenda tomorrow, or somewhere on the agenda in any case. So we'll start it at the top and then move it if we want to. Anything else? Well done. You stayed awake all the way through.
You may have noticed that there's a link on your meeting evaluations, so you can do this online if you want to. It's SurveyMonkey. And there's even an app for it. We'll get you that information. Yes, I understand this microphone thing is an abysmal disaster, and we're going to do everything we can to fix it for tomorrow, not only for your sakes. I got my exercise today. I don't know what I would be complaining about, but also for Doug and Greg trying to listen in through our Rube Goldberg outfit. So go ahead and write that on there, but I hear you. So we got a lot done today.
We did, yeah. Well done, everyone.
Any thoughts?
We say these for the absent people, or would you like us to
Say what?
these materials?
Oh,
People that are absent.
oh, the members got them.
Yeah.
We'll find a use for them.
They got electronic. Oh, they can have an electronic copy.
Yeah.
We'll send them. Give it to your friends.
Good night, Doug. Everybody say good night, Doug.
Don't forget
It's
to
good
fill out your
morning.
evaluations for the night.
Yeah.